The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild dared to stray from the franchise norms to dive into uncharted waters. Uncharted since the first Zelda 33 years ago, that is, but in this day and age of gaming, unbounded exploration isn't exactly a novelty anymore. Every other company is coming out with another massive open world game. Because of this, it's becoming tougher to stand out in this genre. I believe Breath of the Wild didn't just stand out but revolutionized the open world setting. In this video, I'll be discussing what aspects from Breath of the Wild could carry to its sequel. What's good, guys? It's Edible Incredible. As I'm sure most of you know, a leaker who seems to be quite reliable with his previous predictions stated if you liked Breath of the Wild, you will like next year. This could be total BS, but it's already been over 2 years since its launch. Majora's Mask released just 17 months after Ocarina, and The Wind Waker just 2.5 years from Majora. If they're reusing the physics engine, which I don't know why they wouldn't, it could be farther along than we think. Now, Anuma has mentioned the open-air genre from Breath of the Wild is here to stay, but the question is, what specific traits will remain? I think the Paraglider is the one thing that's a given. It works so well, and I'm sure they can improve upon it, or at the very least, make its aesthetic customizable. The sandbox style of Breath of the Wild sparked some crazy glitches like the flying minecart. This of course wasn't something Nintendo expected, but hopefully it encourages their ideas for the future. I know I'm just a kid in a candy store when I say this, but having a loftwing or something similar to the Master Cycle Zero that takes advantage of Sheikah tech possibly, but is flyable. Just imagine soaring to your next objective, but seeing an enemy camp down below, dive bombing to take them out, and landing safely with the Paraglider just in time. If you think about it, the Paraglider mechanic started back in The Wind Waker with the Deku Leaf, then reappeared in Skyward Sword as the Sailcloth. It didn't really reinvent itself in Skyward Sword since Link just pulls it out even if you don't press anything. But now that it has in Breath of the Wild, the sky is literally the limit to where its creativity in traversing the world could go. Okay, so from this moment prior, this script was written before the trailer. The Paraglider is nowhere to be seen, but I don't think that necessarily means it's completely gone. If the game takes place only underground, they could still make the cavern spacious enough to use it in certain scenarios. But the trailer scenes could just be the introduction to the game, meaning we traverse the outside world of Hyrule once again, but maybe with a new gimmick that gives exploring a fresh take. After all, Anuma did mention he wants to revisit this world. Another frequently used item that doesn't appear in the trailer is the Sheikah Slate. Once again, I feel this doesn't necessarily mean it won't show up. We'll have to wait for a gameplay trailer to know for sure. But so far, there's no Sheikah technology present. The ruins were such a huge factor in terms of gameplay and specifically puzzle solving. Without them, the concept of shrines would be completely taken away, especially if traditional dungeons become the main focus. Don't get me wrong, the possibility of mini dungeons are likely, but probably not the way shrines operated, which made use of the Sheikah Slate's powers. Shrines also took advantage of a new way to puzzle solve, with multiple ways to reach a conclusion. I could see Nintendo reusing this method, but in a different environment. The music and the Divine Beasts were unique because as the level of urgency rose, so did the soundtrack. Implementing this and the variety of solutions to puzzles into a traditional dungeon aesthetic could make for a nice mash of old and new for the next stage of Zelda dungeons, since enemies in Breath of the Wild attacked as a unit, as opposed to how they used to take their turn. They were a lot more intelligent than what the series is accustomed to, but their diversity lacked severely. This fighting style could be taken advantage of with the inclusion of older enemies. If its sequel does in fact return to the darker side of the franchise, I feel a bunch of traditional enemies would fit perfectly. Skulltulas, Redeads, Poes, Wallmasters, and Stalfos to name a few. Same goes for the bosses. Now that the Calamity is demolished, as far as we know at least, we can finally return to the way Ganondorf himself spawned bosses. During the tech demo for Zelda Wii U, we saw what appeared to be a darker themed Zelda presenting a giant Goma battle. The GameCube Zelda tech demo was also in a darker light with the Ganondorf fight, but we didn't see this fully fleshed out until the follow-up for The Wind Waker. With Breath of the Wild sequel on the horizon, could this hint at Goma's glorious return? I know that's me being a little too hopeful, but I thought that's an interesting correlation. Breath of the Wild made the champion blue this era's Kokiri green. The trailer shows Link and Zelda in this blue once more, but will the customization of outfits return? Or will the player be confined to Link's go-to getup? Link still has the Master Sword in the trailer. Will it have a similar concept in forcing the player to wait for it to recharge to keep the cycle of weapons flowing? Or will we wield the Blade of Evil's Bane throughout this new journey, maybe powering it up along the way similar to Skyward Sword? Okay, so how will Nintendo make the same overworld feel new? Maybe a couple years has passed since the fall of the Calamity and we'll be able to witness how civilization has progressed without a fear of a looming apocalypse. I believe in my heart that if all of us work together, we can restore Hyrule to its former glory. Perhaps even beyond, but it all must start with us. Maybe Link and Zelda paved the way for the spread of settlements, and even Castletown's rebirth? Please, Nintendo? But once again, this is just me being optimistic. The only thing we can go on is how Zelda wants to restore Hyrule. One final thing I want to touch on is how Breath of the Wild allowed the player to head straight to Ganon after the plateau. I doubt Nintendo will carry this over to the sequel if they really want to emphasize Ganondorf's backstory. Opening doors to his final fight right off the bat would limit their opportunity in telling a fleshed out narrative. But they can still make the order of dungeons up to the player. I love the concept of how we found Link's memories in Breath of the Wild. Something similar for Ganondorf would be amazing. So what tropes do you think Nintendo will borrow from Breath of the Wild? This next game may end up being a mixture of the new open air feel with the old Zelda formulaic vibes like traditional dungeons, enemies, and a linear story progression. If that ends up being the case, I believe this game has the potential to top what Breath of the Wild accomplished and set even more foundation for this next era of Zelda. Hope you enjoyed this speculation video on the gameplay elements for the next title. My last two uploads were more so focused on the lore. If that interests you, I'll link them in the corners. And as always, I hope you all stay hyped. Love you guys. Peace!